Well, good morning. I want to talk about the Celtic race or Celtic peoples. Now, there is no Celtic race. This is something I've been seeing a lot lately on social media. People claiming that they're members of the Celtic this and Celtic that. As if, and also I'm seeing maps of Europe saying the spread of the Celtic people throughout Europe. There is no Celtic race. It doesn't exist. There never was a Celtic race. Celtic comes from a Greek term Keltoid, which means basically foreigner. And in the in the classical and the post-classical sense, Celtic people were basically anyone outside the Greco-Romano influence. So it was applied to a whole sway of people all the way from Anatolia to the west coast of Ireland. And then there was, of course, the Teutonics and stuff like that who were outside it. But there's no Celtic people as such. And even the concept of this Celtic grouping is extremely iffy. It's a very British, Victorian kind of thing that popped up out of our classical literature and classical philosophy. Now, there's people out there who claim that, say, the Celtic people of Anatolia, and when I say Celtic, that's always in inverted commas, and the Celtic people of Ireland are part of the same race, that the culture spread across, that they're all the same tribe, and everyone in between, like the Gauls and all the others, the Celt-Iberians, are all the same people, the Milanese tribe of northern Italy. No, that's not true at all. Let's talk about the Irish first, my own people. The Irish are Gaels, Gaelic people, okay? And there's tremendous evidence to suggest that the Irish are even around longer than the Celtic concept. We're actually quite older than that. Our roots go back to the Proto-Europeans before even the Indo-European invasion, and we would be similar to the Sardinians and the Northern Iberians, the Galicians, and genetic records have definitely shown that to be the case. Although the Irish are a mixture of race, but from our earliest incarnation as a tribal people, we're Gaels, Gaelic people. Now, the Celtic thing is a lazy term. About 100 and odd years ago, there was pottery found in a place called Hallstatt in Central Europe. And it was the first recognized Latin style artwork. This is the artwork with the, spirals and all that kind of thing. And that's been pointed to ever since then as the actual place we can point to something called a Celtic people. Frank Delaney in his groundbreaking 1980s TV series for the BBC and his book, which is an excellent read, but still plays on the old thing of it being a race, a Europe-wide race, begins in the Hallstatt caves, I think it's in Austria. And this form of artwork then became, whatever that artwork shows up, it's Celtic peoples. And then they used the linguistic terms. Now, the Irish speak Goldic Celtic, we're told, but I don't know if that's true either. You compare, so you have Irish and Welsh, right? Now, Irish and the Welsh is only 40 miles apart. And they're both called Celtic languages, but yet they're nothing in common. An Irish person couldn't understand what a Welsh person was saying, and a Welsh person couldn't understand what an Irish person was saying. And they're only across the sea. And that, Scottish is different because the Scottish were kind of created by the Irish, but that's why they speak Gaelic up there. But that it just goes to show you how fragile this whole Celtic concept is. This idea that it's one big long race. Now, even the artwork stuff is a strange one. Now, this Hallstatt culture that gave birth to the spirals and all that stuff, right? That's found, yes, through that range from Anatolia to the west coast of Ireland. However, does it suggest a continuation or a lineage? I don't know about that. I mean, maybe there could be something as simple. It could be two things. Something as simple as someone was traveling from Central Europe to England or somewhere, and they noticed they were wearing a brooch or a piece of leather or a tattoo, and they said, "Oh, I really like that artwork," and they started copying it. It's just like they copy styles of music and everything else, even to this day. Or the other part, it could have all happened at the same time, like an artistic movement that exploded at the same time. All through history, we know about artistic movements that grow up out of the blue, suddenly appear in all over the place at the same time. So it could have been something like that. But then even that's iffy. There's a megalith near here called Cloverhill, here in Sligo, and it's the only piece of megalithic rock art from the Neolithic that's actually in Sligo. There's some Bronze Age stuff, but no megalithic from the artwork from the Neolithic period. So we're talking 5,500 years ago. And it's an interesting. I spoke about it in the Druid Code. It's an interesting structure, megalith. In the front, it has the classic, what you call the Neolithic artwork, the hatches, the spirals, the concentric rings. But in the back, it has the Latin, wavy, Celtic, spirally kind of stuff. Now, what makes this really interesting is the stones at the back are actually older. Well, we're assuming they're older because it was the first part of the actual infrastructure. So you're telling me then that this thing was built in the Neolithic, and you see it's all over the place. But there's absolutely no Celtic race, none at all. It doesn't exist. It's an umbrella term, a handy phrase for non-classical Roman stuff, um, artwork. Now, even the stuff you associate with Irish artwork, like the Book of Kells, those animals, those interlaced animals, that appears all over the Nordic world as well, from the Gretts to the Vikings, the Norsemen, and down through the Picts in Scotland into the Irish. The classic gripping beast, as it's called, style of artwork. So where did that come from? And that's called Celtic, and yeah, it's really Nordic. Well, it seems to be. And then you have now this new thing now among the alt scene that the Irish come from the Scythians. That's a lot of bullshit, that is. That's straight out of biblical Christian nonsense. That whole, British Israelism stuff, that the tribes have this moved west and all that, the two of they Dan and the tribe of Dan and all that bullshit. But so there you have it. There's no Celtic race. They never existed. There was independent tribes that may at different periods had shared similar forms of art and so on. If you hear and there were things like Druidism, the Druids did spread through different Celtic tribes. We know there were Druids in Gaul. We know there were Druids in Italy, in the Milanese tribes. We know that they were in Ireland, and we know that they were in Scotland and England and places like that, Wales. That could be that's a religious thing. Religions are often cross-cultural. So, and also, there's a huge misunderstanding with the Druids today. Anyway, they weren't shamans. They were almost like public servants. They were more interested in law and genealogy than they were in magic and witchcraft and things like that. So there you go. That's the Celtic people. They never existed really. Irish people are Gaelic, and so are the Scots, and the other half are Picts, and they just share a lot of commonalities in artwork and supposedly linguistics, but they don't really. I mean, there were still remnants of the Gaulish language spoken in the 1700s in France that was written down in books phonetically, and it sounds nothing like Irish or Welsh or anything. So there you have it. Celtic is more. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing or anything. It's actually it's a handy association. There's nothing wrong with being, this whole thing of like, pan-Celticism, different parts of Europe coming together to celebrate music and stuff. I think that's, as a club, it's really good. It has a lot of usage, but they're not racially connected. They're not. They're just not, and they're not tribally connected. They're very, very different. So this whole thing of like Celts were spread all across Europe, and they were all kind of like interlinked and interbred. That's all nonsense. That's not true. That's a very Victorian idea. Celtite just means foreigner outside that of the Greco-Roman Empire, and they were diverse tribes that seemed to have a kind of a similar bond in the Bronze Age around the Hallstatt culture. But even that's, that's just what academics like to do. They like to stitch things together to create stories that ultimately fit the whole biblical bullshit of like the tribes moving across Europe. That's ultimately where it comes from, and to fit it in with the biblical timeline. So there you go. There's no Celts.